This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor before, I'm here to fill you in on the secret. Anchor is the easiest, most efficient, and most stress-free way to make a podcast. Anchor provides you all the tools you need to record, produce, and edit your podcast, and it's available right at the edge of your fingertips or from your laptop and computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast to all of the major podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, so it's the easiest and best way to make your voice heard. And even if you're just starting out, or you're a podcast veteran and you've had one for 7 years, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor has everything you need to help make your voice heard. And best of all, Anchor is free. Everyone should have a podcast, in my opinion. And if you are thinking about making a podcast, definitely you should make a podcast with Anchor. So go ahead and download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm. Good morning, world. Welcome to another episode of Xendependently Minded. If you are a new or returning listener, I hope you enjoy this episode. And make sure you share Xendependently Minded with everybody you can, because it's the best podcast out there for combat sports and for news and rants. So on this episode, I'm going to, of course, I'm going to predict, analyze, and just basically give my picks for the entire main card for this upcoming fight night that's main evented between Kelvin Gastelum and Robert Whittaker. So this is a fun card. I'm really excited for this one, but I'm also even more excited. I'm already looking ahead and just really, really pumped up for next weekend's fight card. Of course, I'm going to do a prediction podcast for that one too. But this week, of course, starting off with Kelvin Gastelum and Robert Whittaker. This is a fun card. There are a lot of underrated scraps on here. There are going to be some, I can already see just through watching each guy's fight career, watching their most recent fights, and then just kind of using the best of my knowledge to predict these fights. There are definitely going to be some memorable moments that come from this fight night for sure. And, once you listen to this podcast, you'll totally understand why, and I'm going to break down and explain why why I'm so excited for this entire card. So, starting off in the lightweight division, we have a bout between Luis Pena and Alex Munoz. So this is one, there's fan favorite Luis Pena, looks like Bob Ross. A lot of people like him. He's fighting Alex Munoz. So Alex Munoz is a newcomer into the UFC. He's only fought once, and he actually lost his UFC debut against Nasrat. I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, but you guys know what I'm talking about. It's the lightweight version of Kelvin Gastelum. He looks just like him. But so Luis Pena, starting off with him, I'm going to talk about him. Luis Pena he's a young guy. Like I said, he's a fan favorite as far as up and comers go. His fighting style is just a lot of pressure and a lot of volume, and he just likes to push a pace that most guys cannot handle. But in his last fight, he was submitted, so he's shown susceptibility to being submitted. I think he has 1 or 2 submission wins in the UFC, a couple knockouts and decision wins, but always he throws high pressure, high volume. So, or he pushes a high pressure and then throws a lot of high volume strikes. So it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with Alex Munoz, because Alex Munoz, before he got knocked out in his UFC debut, he was undefeated. I think his record's like 5-1, so he hasn't had that many fights. But Munoz is like a complete. When it comes to striking, they're both strikers. They're not wrestlers, but Munoz is the complete opposite as far as volume. He doesn't throw a lot of strikes. He's kind of a slow starter, but he loads up his shots, and when he does land those shots, he's got some power. So it's going to be interesting to see, this high pressure versus high power, low volume style, the stylistic matchup that we have coming up. It's going to be interesting, but definitely something that I've noticed with Alex Munoz is that he fights with his chin up in the air, and that's something that Pena is going to be able to capitalize, and it's going to look really good for the judges with Pena throwing strikes and just pushing that high pressure that I was talking about. And I think eventually, I think that Munoz might be able to land a couple big shots on Luis Pena, but I don't think Pena's been knocked out in the UFC. So it's gonna, he's a tough guy to put away. Like I said, he was finished in his last fight by submission, but Munoz is not going to come in and try to submit him. I don't see that happening. And all that being said, with Munoz fighting with his chin up and Pena's high volume, I think Pena's going to outstrike him and he's going to win by decision. So moving on to the next bout, we have a middleweight bout between Abdul Razak Al Hassan and Jacob Malkoun. So this is another potential banger for sure. This is like, if there's any fight that's going to be a complete banger, of course, besides the main event, I think this is going to be the one. So Jacob Malkoun is a boxer. He's actually boxed a few times, I think, in his amateur career, and I think he has a couple professional boxing wins too. So he has some good knockouts, and he's gotten good boxing, of course. But he was knocked out in 18 seconds in his UFC debut by Phil Hawes. I'm sure you guys all remember that knockout. It was a crazy knockout. Pretty sure it was from what I remember, it was a one-punch knockout. So, that being said, he's finishable. He's been knocked out. He was knocked out in his last fight, I believe. Yeah, that was his UFC debut against Phil Hawes, and he got knocked out. He was a pretty exciting prospect. I think he still is, but coming into that fight, he was the favorite, and then Phil Hawes knocked him out. And as far as Abdul Hassan goes, he loads up his shots and has some serious power, but he also fights with his chin up. And Al Hassan has been knocked out a couple times too in his UFC career. So in my opinion, there is absolutely no way this fight goes the distance. Unless both guys come in kind of fighting conservative and just more cautious because they're both coming off losses. But this fight is not going to go the distance. There's no way it goes the distance. Both guys have some serious power. They load up shots. They try to take their opponent's heads off. And if they're not taking their opponent's heads off, they're getting their heads taken off. So I just think Al Hassan's, his longer career and his advantage in fighting experience is going to help him. And I think Phil Hawes is just going to come in thinking about Malkoun is going to come in, just that his UFC debut is going to be weighing too heavy on him. He's going to come in and just let Al Hassan walk him down. And Al Hassan, I think, in my official prediction is Al Hassan is going to knock out Malkoun in the first round. Moving on to the next fight, we have a heavyweight bout between Andrei Arlovsky and Chase Sherman. So this is another fun one. We have legend and all-time great Andrei Arlovsky. He's been fighting for 20 years. This is, I think, his 21st year. He's been fighting. Well, it's been 21 years since he made his debut in the UFC, and he was fighting before that. So he's been fighting for a long time, and he's a legend for sure. And actually, up until his last submission loss, he was stringing together a pretty decent win streak. It's just his chin is depleted. He's been knocked out so many times over his UFC career, and when he's fighting the cream of the crop guys, he's getting knocked out. We saw him get knocked out. Basically, everybody's knocked him out, except for that small win streak he's been on. He's been shown. What I took and what I've gathered from his small win streak before he got submitted, he's using his veteran experience and just basically just straight up, he's had a much bigger experience gap and advantage over these young guys and up-and-comers that he's been fighting. So he's been using that and just not squeaking through. Some of them were dominant decision wins where he's just outstriking and just fighting a smarter fight. And Chase Sherman, on the other hand, he's a boxer. He's never even attempted a takedown in his entire UFC career, and he used to actually do bare knuckle boxing. So for sure, without a doubt, he's going to look to take Arlovsky's head straight off because, like I said, Arlovsky's his decades of experience is going to help him make this fight look a little competitive, and we could be a little unsure in the beginning, and Sherman will have to pick his shots wisely because Arlovsky could totally use his experience to his advantage and just outmaneuver and not allow Sherman to come bum rush him and knock him out. But that all being said, I I just think Arlovsky's chin is too depleted, and I think Sherman also has a little bit of experience. Like I said, he has bare knuckle boxing experience, so he's going to find a spot to land those power shots, and I think he's going to knock out Arlovsky in the first round, unfortunately. And then I do think Arlovsky should retire. I think he should have retired after one of his wins, but he kept fighting and got submitted. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, my official prediction is Sherman by knockout in the first round. So moving on to a fight that I'm really, really excited about. It's a lightweight fight. It's the co-main event between Jeremy Stephens and Drakkar Klose. I think his name is pronounced Klose. That's the way that Dominic Cruz and John Anik pronounce it. I thought it was Klose, but he's American apparently. And he's got a cool name. Kind of reminds me of like Dragon or someone from Game of Thrones. But anyway, Drakkar, his last fight out, he got knocked out by Beneil Dariush. And then Jeremy Stephens got knocked out by Calvin Kattar. This is a fight. I think this could potentially be Jeremy Stephens' last fight in the UFC because he's on a really disappointing losing streak. I think he's got 3 losses in a row, and then also has a no contest where he got I think it was an eye poke by Yair Rodriguez the first time they fought. And then Yair came in and dominated Stephens when they actually fought, and they came back the second time. So, Jeremy Stephens, he's been on a losing streak, and he's a scrapper. We all know him for being this wild dude who just throws insane shots. Like, that fight with Calvin Kattar was crazy. These guys had no reservations for their health. They had no defense. They were just throwing haymaker after haymaker, and then eventually Kattar landed that perfect elbow, and it was so beautiful the way he was able to finish Stephens. But Jeremy Stephens is super tough. He is a dangerous guy, but every time he's fought the top of the heap guys, he's lost. So as tough as he is fighting a really good and really promising opponent in Drakkar Klose. So Drakkar throws high volume, and he's got a couple finishes, but he doesn't really finish people as often as Jeremy Stephens, if we were to compare, which, they're both going to fight each other, so I might as well compare here. But we saw Drakkar hurt Beneil when they fought in that crazy turn of events, but then he went wild, and I've talked a lot about a few fighters on this card that fight with their chins up, but Drakkar, really, he fights like Tony Ferguson with his chin up, and, it worked up until his Beneil loss. He rushed in on Beneil. He sensed that he got hurt, got a little wild, came in with his chin up, and then he got caught and got knocked out in that crazy, crazy, amazing turn of events. And that all being said, Jeremy Stephens, he doesn't break easily, and he's tough. He might be able to catch Drakkar while Drakkar rushes in and try to, with that volume and that high pace that he likes to fight at. But I think Drakkar is going to use that volume to his advantage, and he's going to fight a lot smarter than he has been. I think he's going to come in, and he's just going to outstrike Jeremy, and for the most part, avoid Jeremy's wild and tough shots, and he's going to win by decision. I'm not 100% confident in my predictions. I never am, but with this one, I'm a little less confident, and I'll tell you why. So, I don't know if you guys saw the weigh-ins and the official face-off, but when Drakkar and Jeremy faced off, Jeremy pushed Drakkar and he got pissed. So there is a possibility that Drakkar comes in, chip on his shoulder, he wants to prove something after that knockout loss against Beneil. And another thing that I almost forgot to mention is Drakkar likes to throw leg kicks, and he was really piecing up Beneil Dariush's legs when they were fighting. So that could be something that Jeremy Stephens needs to watch out for. But also, we've seen Jeremy Stephens tear people up with his leg kicks. So this is going to be a banger for sure. But you never know. One guy could come in really emotionally and it could play in their favor. But ultimately, I do think Drakkar is going to fight smart, but he's not going to, he's not going to be conservative. He's going to come in and throw a lot of shots, high volume, high pace like usual. And Jeremy's also going to throw some crazy looping shots that could potentially put Drakkar out. But I think just in my humble opinion, Drakkar is going to come in and he's going to win by decision and he's going to outstrike Jeremy Stephens. But it'll be a fun one, and I'm really excited. I don't think there's any way that fight cannot be good, which is we're really lucky to have Jeremy Stephens. Say what you want about him. He was embarrassed by Conor McGregor. He got knocked out. Really rough knockout against Calvin Kattar, but when Jeremy Stephens fights, people tune in, and I'm excited for this one for sure. And moving on, of course, to the main event, we have a very highly anticipated fight. Was booked before. Robert Whittaker got hurt and he had to pull out, and then we got Israel Adesanya and Kelvin Gastelum, which was one of the greatest fights of all time, and it really cemented and put Israel Adesanya, on the collision course to become the star that he is right now, and he is going to continue to keep rising, but that's a topic for another discussion. We have Robert Whittaker fighting Kelvin Gastelum. This is a very important fight for the middleweight bout. I know Izzy doesn't want a rematch. Robert Whittaker, he doesn't think he's worthy, but Robert Whittaker, if he beats Kelvin Gastelum, that's 3 wins in a row he's coming. When you lose the title shot, or you get knocked out or you just lose while trying to become champion, the next logical thing to do is to string together a win or 2 or even 3 in Robert Whittaker's case to try to get that title shot again. And Robert Whittaker is such a good striker. In my opinion, he's probably top. He's got to be top 3 or maybe even probably top 5 is what I'm gonna play it safe and say top 5. But he's one of the best strikers in the UFC. Until Israel Adesanya came in and dismantled him in 2 rounds, I thought Robert Whittaker was the best striker in the UFC, and I still think he's one of the best. We saw that really beautiful 1-2 and then roundhouse kick that he landed on Jared Cannonier that almost finished him, got him wobbled. He's such a great striker and used to be champion, so I really do hope if he wins, he gets that title shot again because he deserves it. He's a young guy. He's been around for a long time, and there's not really any threats in the division for Israel Adesanya besides Marvin Vettori, if I'm being completely honest. So Kelvin Gastelum, on the other hand, he was on a couple. He had a couple losses in a row, and then he came out in his last fight, and wasn't that exciting, but he came out and he did what he needed to win. But because of that kind of boring win that Kelvin Gastelum just got, a lot of people are forgetting, how dangerous and how smart of a fighter Kelvin Gastelum is. Kelvin Gastelum is a guy that's a really solid wrestler, but he has like a sneaky way of landing that left straight and that left hook on you, and it's powerful. We've seen him rock and knock out lots of people. He knocked out Tim Kennedy. He knocked out Michael Bisping. That was the craziest, most telling, and most impressive win of his career, in my opinion. You could say what you want about Michael Bisping. He fought very, very soon after that GSP loss. He could have been coming in. There are a lot of factors that weigh into that. But ultimately, what mattered is that Gastelum came in and he got a knockout win over a former champion and legend, Hall of Famer Michael Bisping. So this is a really fun one because I can't see Kelvin Gastelum's wrestling. I can't see it be a factor because Robert Whittaker, his style, of course, is blitzing, throwing combinations, throwing volume, and just really, really intense, high IQ, very smart striking. But when he's been taken down, like he got taken down by an Olympic huge wrestler, Yoel Romero, and he was able to not really accumulate too much damage on the ground, and he'll go in, he has a couple submission wins. What I'm trying to say is, if the fight does go to the ground, I'm totally confident in Robert Whittaker's abilities on the ground. So I think we're going to see a good old-fashioned striking scrap between a guy with some serious power and another dude with power, but also really high IQ, really great technical striking. So this is one that I've been really torn on, because if Kelvin Gastelum comes in and fights like he did against Darren Till, fights like the way he did in his last fight, he's going to lose straight up. He's going to get pieced up, and he possibly could get finished. The reason he didn't get finished against Darren Till is because both guys were coming in and fighting very conservatively, because Darren Till was on a 2-loss streak where he lost against Tyron Woodley, gave him his first loss in his career, and then he got knocked out by Jorge Masvidal. And then he beat Kelvin Gastelum in a very conservative striking affair, and then he lost to Robert Whittaker in their fight. He did actually drop Robert Whittaker and he hurt him, which is a factor that I wanted to talk about more. But I'm going to finish that thought. Kelvin Gastelum, if he comes in and he just holds back, it's not going to work against Robert Whittaker. But on the other side, it could possibly work for him because Robert Whittaker, he's been hurt in all 3 of his last fights. He got wobbled against Jared Cannonier. There was like a power jab that Cannonier just landed. He put it like pinpoint on Robert's chin and he got a little wobbled, but it was towards the end of the fight, so it didn't matter. But in a 5-round fight, that's really important. And then when Robert Whittaker fought Darren Till, he got dropped by an elbow. It didn't officially count for some reason as a knockdown, I don't think. But when he was rushing in, doing that, that blitz style that he has, Darren Till was able to drop him with an elbow, and it looked pretty scary there, depending on who you're fans of. I'm a fan of everybody now. I respect all fighters, but there are some guys I like more than others. But, that Darren Till and Robert Whittaker fight, it was hard to pick because I love both guys. And then before that, when he fought Israel Adesanya, of course, he got knocked out. And then before that, he got knocked down twice and almost finished by Yoel Romero. So Robert Whittaker, he has a tough chin, but he's shown like a pretty high susceptibility to power shots lately. So if he does, it's totally possible that Kelvin Gastelum can lull him into a false sense of security, like the way Yoel Romero did. And then, I don't want to say a false sense of security because, Robert Whittaker in that second Yoel Romero fight he was piecing up Yoel. He got Yoel's eye to be swollen, almost shut. So he was actually successfully fighting, but then Yoel was able to do what Yoel does best, land a crazy counter shot on him twice actually, and then hurt him. So Kelvin Gastelum could do that. Robert Whittaker could go in, win 1, 2, or even 3 rounds, and then in the 4th or 5th round unload a crazy left shot on him, which he's done to many people. He did it to Israel Adesanya a couple times. He landed a head kick on Izzy that kind of had... people kind of play into that fight a little too much. They talk about like, oh, Kelvin Gastelum is so good, and look how far he pushed Israel Adesanya, which is totally true. He is a very good, underrated fighter. But Israel Adesanya has just improved leaps and bounds. If you see him go from Vettori to Brunson, Tavares, and then you go to when he was holding back against Anderson Silva, and then you watch him against Kelvin Gastelum, and then Robert Whittaker. He's just improving so much. So I just think it's more so that fight was closer because Israel Adesanya has just been improving a lot. But it's a really tough one for me to pick. But honestly, if I have to pick, definitely my prediction is going to be leaning towards Robert Whittaker. I think it's going to be a back-to-back war. It's going to be, both guys are going to have back-to-back moments on each side. But I think Kelvin is just going to come in too cautious, too conservative like he has for his past few fights. And I think Robert's just going to put on a striking clinic. But I do think Kelvin is going to land a couple shots. We could see a couple moments where Rob's hurt. But he's just a superior athlete. Like you said, he's rediscovered his love for the game. And we're going to see probably the best Robert Whittaker we've seen in a while. So I think Robert Whittaker is going to win by decision. That's my official pick. So thank you for tuning in on this episode of Xendependently Minded. Don't forget to check out in a couple days. Every Monday or Tuesday, I have my Xendependent News podcast where I kind of do a serious and sometimes satirical take on world news events because I like to stay informed and I want to inform you guys, but I want to have a kind of lighthearted tone with it because, every time you go on in the news, any kind of news website, most of the time it's just very morbid, it's very negative, and I want to keep people informed. I want to inform myself, but I also want to make it fun and not so negative and so dark and so morbid. And then I also do rants where I just give my humble opinion and my humble thoughts on all kinds of things that I've just been thinking about lately. So, as always, stay safe, stay away from those crazies out there. Thank you.